You cannot let him be somebody's next Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones. 2 weeks left till the trade deadline, and it's becoming more and more clear which teams might be incentivized to make a move. Who could be buyers? Who should be sellers? We've got some teams that we want to talk about here today, some specific player names that I think deserve to be mentioned, and some historical data with which we'd like to frame this conversation. I'm Lindsay Rhodes with Sam Bruchhaus, both of us with you for another edition of the SumerSports show. Sam, we've already seen a few teams in action. The Browns have made a couple of moves. Chances are likely pretty good that we're going to see a number more trades becoming more and more frequent in the last few years.
Definitely. We see a big uptick. And I think the action that the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cleveland Browns have engaged in already this season indicates that this is a way that the more analytically inclined teams think that they can get assets, think that they can get players that can help them later on in the season, and indicates that this will probably continue a trend of increasing trades per year.
50 mid-season trades pulled off in the last 3 years, 85 in the last 6 years, and prior to that, 60 in the 17 years leading up to that. So clearly this is a relatively new phenomenon. I am highly in favor of this, as I know you are too. We talked to Thomas Dimitroff around this time last year, and we talked about some of the reasons why general managers now, particularly some of the younger general managers, are a little bit more likely to get involved in some of these trades. And that's a conversation that we can have in the next couple of weeks. First, I want to get into the types of players that are traded. Having looked at all of the data that you have looked at since 2002, are there any position groups that stand out as any that are more likely to be on the move at this time of year?
It's really interesting, Lindsay, because it almost exactly mirrors our sticky stats research from the summer. Wide receivers and edge rushers are the two most traded positions. We've seen 33 wide receivers get traded. We've seen 29, defensive end, outside linebacker types get traded since 2002. And I think what this indicates, Lindsay, is that these players are identified as being able to help, or their talents are able to track to the next level or to the next team or the next situation. And I think because of that, teams would prefer to invest in those sure things because their stats are sticky and you can kind of count on those players doing whatever they did, playing whatever role they played, and moving that over to your team, perhaps filling a need.
Wide receiver especially makes sense, I think, because every team needs so many wide receivers. So you could trade a wide receiver, and that's very different than trading like a quarterback, for instance, right? Like where there's this effectively one on the field at all times. You could trade a role player at a wide receiver that could be an upgrade. Edge is kind of interesting because if you have a good edge, then the chances are probably less likely that you are going to want to part with that good edge. But are these edges that are on the move good edges? We'll get to that. Running back and linebacker next up in terms of frequency, huh?
Correct. And I think that's more of a kind of scheme play and a depth play as it pertains to running backs and linebackers. These are two positions that get hurt quite a bit. These are two of the less premium positions. So as a result, you can spend kind of minimum draft capital to get a player like that on a 1-year deal. I think these are kind of the easier deals as compared to the wide receiver and edge markets where you know exactly what you have to pay. And for that reason, those trades get made. And it's kind of the flip side. You know exactly what you have to pay for a running back. It'll be a 5th or a 6th or a 7th round pick. Similar
Not shocking.
for linebackers.
Not shockingly, at the bottom of this list, offensive linemen, offensive tackles, only 3 traded in this time frame, guards 3, and centers, only 1 center traded in this entire sample. That's wild. And yet, again, not surprising, as we talked about a few weeks ago on the SumerSports show, offensive tackles in particular, the kind that can actually help you, they're few and far between.
No, 100%. And I think for some teams in this league, that's why this is such a stark time. I mean, you're probably trying to scramble to get any offensive line help that you can, but at this point, it's just all used up. Teams are not going to depart with a player who plays every single snap for them and is doing a good job. It makes absolutely no sense, even if they're on a 1-year contract, just given the nature of this league. And so we very, very rarely see those positions move. And really, you kind of look at it, and wide receivers rotate in and out, even if you're a really good player. Edge rushers, D linemen rotate in and out, defensive backs, but quarterbacks and in some cases tight ends and offensive linemen, you kind of want those guys on the field every single play. And as a result, they just don't get traded as much.
Yeah. I mean, even if your team is not going anywhere, you still need somebody to protect the quarterback, right?
Right.
And that brings us to the next question of data and what kinds of teams are making these moves. In general, I think everybody's kind of focusing on the teams that are clearly bad and maybe not going to win a Super Bowl this year, it would seem, as the sellers, quote unquote. And then that leaves a pretty big pool of teams that are maybe potentially in it good enough to make a run to the playoffs. That's a much larger sample of teams. What kinds of teams typically do pull off these moves?
Right. So what we would expect over a 22 or 23 year sample is that the number of teams or the types of teams making the trades would look a lot like how the league looks, with, the median being a 50% win team or a 0 point differential team. And that is kind of what we see in the data. But what we really see when it comes to the mean and the standard deviation is that it's slightly to the right, meaning that typically those teams who feel like they can be frisky are sitting at a game over 500. Those are the teams who are going to get a little bit more involved. And so as a result, the 25th percentile of team that typically makes this trade is like a one game under 500. And so those teams in the middle that are really feel like they can compete, or just got a game over 500, or just got a player back or something like that and think they're just a player away, those are the teams that are really going to be in the mix. But we do see involvement from the best teams and the worst teams. It kind of goes without saying that typically the teams that are making these trades are teams that are really bad, sending a player to a really, really good team to fill a very small need. Unfortunately, they are a very bad team, so they don't have a ton of very good players. Or two teams that have differing timelines that are kind of working together to make a trade. So it's interesting to negotiate those timelines, especially given that the teams most likely to make these trades are the teams slightly over 500.
Should we start when looking at this year's group of teams? Should we start with the teams that we think are likely sellers, figure out what they have to sell, and then go find them homes? Or do you think that it's smarter to work the other way around with the teams that might be buyers and what it is that they need and where they might find that? Like, what should our process be here, Sam?
Yeah, I think that there's two major teams that I look at to really make trades. And those are teams whose record indicates that they are really good, but their point differential indicates that maybe they're not so good and may need to add a piece. And then the second, on the flip side, is the franchises that are not really doing very good, have a long-term future plan, and thus would be willing to give up those assets. So there's a couple of teams in there. Obviously, on the second end, we've already seen the Browns be willing to make moves. They deal Joe Flacco, who started for them, for a 5th round. I'd put the Saints in there as well, with a very long-term front office there and a brand new head coach who seems to be kind of moving along with this team. And then in the same kind of vein, I think I'd put the Raiders there as well, as a team who may be willing to sell, given that they have a trusted head coach in Pete Carroll and a new general manager as well.
Yeah, and that they've been outscored by 77 points on the season, and
Correct.
It's starting to look like this is a full and total rebuild that's not going anywhere this year. There are some other teams that you didn't mention that I think, and I want to go back to some of the ones that you did, but I think that there are a few more teams that would be in this conversation if you were just looking at, like, so far it's been bad. Right.
Yep.
And then maybe, I mean, the Titans, for instance, have been outscored by almost 100 points on the season. They are minus 96. Now, on the one hand, I don't think that you can afford to sell off almost anything on offense, because you have to put pieces around Cam Ward so that you can at least figure out what you're getting out of him. You need to develop him. Do we agree about that? That if you're selling anything, it's probably on the defensive side of the ball?
Right. I think the Titans are in a very interesting position because it is really early for them. They have a long-term plan, but they have a quarterback that they drafted number 1, and you want to be able to build around him. So I'd be remiss to say that anything will be coming, particularly off their offensive line, which we've already discussed. But in particular, I don't think they're going to de-invest in any of their wide receivers. I think if we see anything move, it'll be at the running back position and potentially with Tony Pollard, even though they don't have great depth at that running back position, or on the defensive side of the ball. But the problem is, Lindsay, as we said, when you have that steep of a point differential, it probably means that you don't have the players to improve that point differential. So it'll be really interesting how other teams value their high value players, given that they haven't performed super well.
Does it mean that, though? Because you just mentioned Tony Pollard. We know, and if you want to go back and listen to the Sticky Stat series over the summer, that the running back success is highly dependent on the environment that the running back is in. So if the Titans offense is struggling and you have multiple running backs, you could absolutely potentially send Tony Pollard somewhere, and he might absolutely thrive in a different environment.
Yeah, I think that's easy to say. And I think definitely if you get Tony Pollard behind a good offensive line, given his receiving talents, he could just be used in a completely different way. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how his contract is negotiated and how it works out with the Titans, and if there's a landing spot for him in particular.
He seems like a really interesting one, just especially because of Tajee Spears cutting into his snaps. Now it feels like they maybe have a little bit of an extra body there with regards to him. The Bengals, let's come back to them because I think that they're a little bit outliery, having been outscored 78 points on the season, but they don't have Joe Burrow. So it almost feels like you don't necessarily want to blow anything up because you think you're going to be right back in it next year.
Right.
But there is obviously an outlier situation there, Trey Hendrickson, that we need to come back and talk about later. Raiders, we already mentioned. Dolphins minus 65 on the season. It seems to be imploding. On the one hand, if you're going to keep anyone around, you can't take away all of their pieces. This feels very much like you got to make a decision one way or the other, right? Like if you are going to replace the coaching staff and you're going to move on, then we're going to maybe start selling some of these parts off, but maybe not in reverse order.
Yeah, it's a very interesting subset of teams in this kind of tier. I think the Dolphins are by far the top team in this tier, especially given that they do have some premium talent. But at the same time, if this leadership group is going to stay, I think they're going to want to optimize on that talent. And so it's a really tricky position. I think you're certainly making calls. I don't know necessarily if it makes sense to be making calls to them, but I guarantee
making calls like what do you mean? To bring people in?
No. I'm saying making calls to acquire Bradley Chubb, for example. But then, like, if these folks have their jobs on the line, rumors are flying here and there and everywhere. I feel like maybe they're not inclined to get rid of those guys. So it's a very interesting situation. I think there's 3 teams in this tier. And ironically, it's a wide swath of point differential. I think the Dolphins, I think potentially the Giants as well, even though they do have a very young core on offense and an excellent team on defense. And then you look at the Cardinals as well, who just have nothing's gone their way this year, despite having a -1 point differential. There's questions at quarterback. And I think those 3 staffs in particular are kind of in the point where, yeah, we could go and get ourselves another year. If we don't win a lot of games this year, we stay, we get a high draft pick. Maybe we come back next year and we look a lot better. But on the same time, if it really starts going downhill, maybe we don't have jobs anymore.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals are a tough one for me to put into either bucket, to be honest with you, because I don't see them selling because it feels like jobs are on the line. And I don't necessarily see them buying, even though they've only been outscored by 1. You could make an argument based on the scoring differential that they maybe even could add a piece or 2 that would put them over the top. They could have a very different record by the end of the year.
Definitely. I really struggled with 2 teams. And the first is the Cardinals, because they're dealing with a quarterback injury right now. There's 2 other teams that are also in a similar position, the Washington Commanders, Baltimore Ravens, who are dealing with quarterback trouble. But those 2 guys almost made all-pro teams last year. We haven't really seen Kyler Murray play up to that level, which is why I was inclined to put him kind of in this subset of group. But then technically, if you look at point differential, they're better than both of those teams, which is very interesting. And so you really kind of try to place them. You don't know where to place them. And it's very similar to, I think, the Cincinnati Bengals, who you mentioned, who are sitting here one game under 500. All of a sudden, they have a new quarterback who looked very good with 1 week and at least is going to get the ball up in the air to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But can that defense really be helped? I don't know. And
Right.
do you want to move off a window where you probably will have Joe Burrow coming back next year and certainly will be able to win some games? I don't know. The two hardest and biggest teams to watch, which is very similar to last year. It was very similar kind of a move for these two teams last year. The Bengals end up sticking with their team, winning a bunch of games, and the Cardinals kind of did the same thing. But the Bengals and the Cardinals are still two of the most interesting teams at the trade deadline, similar to 2024 in 2025.
I am going to go back to the Dolphins for a second here because I think that there is something that's really interesting about that build. Like the build is so specific. The players that they have are so specifically there, at least on offense. They're specifically built for like a Mike McDaniel offense vision, right? Like speed and all that. And then also to complement Tua specifically. Right. So if you are thinking about, is Tua still our guy for next year? Are we going to have to maybe make a move at quarterback? It feels like they have so many outstanding questions that really put this whole thing up for grabs.
Yep.
And then there's the question of like Chris Greer, you need somebody to actually pull the strings and make these moves. But at the same time, if you start selling, then that could be a sign that you're not going to be around after you're done selling. Do you think that that's maybe a fair read of the situation?
I mean, I think it's really difficult. And I think particularly as it pertains to the wide receiver talent, in which we see a lot of trades happen, they're two tradable wide receivers, quote unquote. One is hurt and ostensibly going to be out for 2 years, Tyreek Hill. And the other one is Jalen Waddle, who's a young piece who you probably don't want to get rid of if you do move on from Tua and you do move on from this offensive staff. You probably want to keep him. So I think the real question is the defensive side of the ball, because the dirty little secret about the 2024 Miami Dolphins was that their defense was really, really good. And that's what kept them afloat and kept them strangely in the playoff talks for most of 2024 up until, they end up missing the playoffs. This year, 32nd in EPA per play. So I think the sign that it's going downhill for the Dolphins and changes will be made will be particularly at the second most traded position, the edge position, where they have Jalen Phillips, they have Bradley Chubb, they have Chop Robinson, who they probably want to lock in on. So if either of the two guys prior to that end up getting traded, I think that's a sign of what the Dolphins' plans are.
This brings up an interesting point too, I think, about like we can sit here and observe about various teams, about what we think objectively should happen and where they actually are in their season. Like there are a lot of teams that I'm comfortable, not a lot, but like there are a few that I'm comfortable going like, we're building for next year. Right. But you also have to do that in such a way that you're still putting a product on the field that can sell tickets, that isn't an obvious tank, because fans turn this into a tanking situation as opposed to a situation where you are just making smart business decisions about future health. And then also that component of the human beings that are in the mix that are protecting their own jobs. Yeah. So like the Browns are an interesting situation because I think we all kind of agree that they probably all have a pass at least through this season. Yeah. Don't you think? So that they can go make moves for the future, knowing that they will be around to benefit from those to a degree.
Right. And they've already done it to a certain degree. The Browns have. Like they went and made the strange Greg Newsome for Tyson Campbell trade, which is clearly a move for the future, given they added a player with a longer contract. So they clearly have that kind of leeway right now.
Yeah. So I think that they've actually, the moves that they've made so far, I think have been very, very interesting in terms of setting themselves up for next year to put themselves in a position in the off season to really fill some of the obvious holes that they have, which I think also makes them an interesting team for the rest of this trade deadline period. Like, I don't think we can't dip into the defense that much. Right. Because you don't want to create extra holes. That's one of the things that they did there with the cornerback trade is they actually got rid of a question mark that was lingering for the offseason. Greg Newsome, they were going to have to figure out a contract for. in the offseason. Take that off the plate. Don't know if we're even going to be able to come to terms with him, what that contract looks like. Let's take that off the table and replace him with a contract that's already existing. Now we've got our cornerback locked up. And so now we have X number of assets, and we need upgrades on the offensive line. We need upgrades at wide receiver. We don't know about the quarterback situation yet. That will kind of, we'll try and figure out the answer to that for the rest of the season. But other than that, like, that's it, right? Like, and so you're creating really specific pathways towards getting better in the offseason. But like I said, they have a luxury of doing that because you kind of know that they can build for that. A lot of these teams are going to operate for the next couple of weeks without that knowledge. And that's a real interesting. It's easy for us, like I said, to objectively say they should make moves to protect themselves for the future. But some of the things that we're going to discuss as being objectively obvious might not get done because they're just hamstrung in the building.
Yeah, I think there's two teams that currently sit at, 5 losses that sit in that spot. The Browns are the first one. Their defense is 5th in EPA per play. They have guys that are young, locked up on the defensive side of the ball. They have guys on the offensive side of the ball at the skill positions that are young and locked up. And so the question I think arises is, can they get the deal where you're getting extremely premium draft capital for a guy who's on, the last year of their deal? Looking over the roster, I just don't think that pathway necessarily exists, but that's the way to build up that offensive line. And that's the way to go and get, those top flight receivers is extreme premium draft capital, which they already have in this year's first round. So I think that's the only real way that we see them as true sellers. And, maybe we see a unique deal where they use some of that late draft capital to bring in a guy that they think they can re-sign or something like that. And would you classify that as a buy for this season? Not really. You consider it long-term. The flip side of that is the Ravens. Lamar Jackson still sits, despite not playing, but like over guys who have had the necessary number of dropbacks, as like the 4th best quarterback in the league. That offense, when and if he comes back, probably will be good again. And the question is, how can they make the defense better? But they're sitting at 1-5 with a terrible point differential. Are they just in a point where it makes sense to let Lamar Jackson get healthy in the same way that the Rams let Matthew Stafford get healthy a couple years ago when it was just a true, year lost early on in the season, and then come back and be you don't think it's lost?
No, I don't, only because too much of it's, has been without Lamar, which changes everything. And they have not had good replacement quarterback play. And so even though they're sitting there at -50 as far as scoring differential and the record is not good, I think if you put him on the field and you can change some of the pieces on defense, now we're just looking at different results. So I realize that, we're running out of runway for them to make a run. But one of the things that I think is most notable is that there's a glut of bad football being played in the AFC in particular. Like, there are 7 teams in the AFC, including the Ravens, I should point out, that have been outscored by 39 points or more on the season. There's 1 in the NFC. It's just the Saints. Like, it's so much more competitive in the NFC seemingly. So if I am one of those teams at the top of the AFC, I'm kind of looking at, like, even if I'm not perfect in ways that maybe I even was in years past, I'm thinking like, this is a good year to go make a run, because it feels kind of there for the taking to a degree. And I think that the Ravens can probably rack up some wins against some of these teams. And look at this, 3 of those 7 teams that I mentioned, again, including the Ravens, are from the AFC North that have been terrible so far this year. The Bengals, the Ravens, and the Browns are all in that category of teams that have been outscored by a wide margin this year. So I feel like they're an interesting outlier of a team that could turn it around.
Yeah. Ironically, now that you're talking about it, Lindsay, like, if I were to build a pathway, I mean, they sit at 30th in expected points added per play allowed on defense. So like, this defense is just not getting it done in a way that it was getting it done last year for whatever reason. But you look at the Bengals from last year, they get off to a 1-4 start. Burrow doesn't look healthy in the first couple of games. Then they end up pulling it together, primarily due to the divisional schedule. The Steelers, we knew at that point, were not really a fantastic team. The Browns were really struggling. They end up pulling off some wins. and then all of a sudden they're in the playoffs talk. So I think that would have to be the direction they go as a team. I just don't know what additions, especially given that, they have also made a player per player move to shore up kind of the secondary and add safety help. So it'll be interesting to see if they really get involved. And this is just a team that competes as well, but it's also a team who really loves draft capital and really wants to maintain and extend the career of Lamar Jackson. So it'll be interesting to see how that injury situation is managed. I think that's going to be like the canary in the coal mine for how they're going to manage this situation.
I mean, I think it would be one thing if you were getting better replacement play.
Yeah.
But you can't, it hasn't been good enough so far. And so I would think that you need to get him back on the field. And also I think to a degree, we can't be that blasé about these guys' careers. If you have Lamar Jackson, you have him for X number of years, you don't know how long he's going to play. Like, don't throw away a season. Never throw away a season if you've got Lamar Jackson on your team. That's my take anyway. I understand what you're saying about wanting to build capital, but in this particular case, the fact that they have lost these games without him on the field, at least in part, makes me think you just got to throw it away. Like, that's an outlier.
Yeah.
To a degree, and now I'm kind of making a wide left turn here. To a degree, I feel that way about the Chargers too. Mm-hmm. You take Joe Alt off the field after already missing Rashawn Slater. And I mean, we saw Justin Herbert was under attack in that game. So yeah, they looked terrible. And even it's affecting the defense. But like, as we know, that does, right? If the defense is on the field all the time because the offense can't stay on the field, then the defense their productivity goes down. The whole entire team is affected. I think once you get Joe Alt back, and if he's able to come back on Thursday, I think it fixes so many problems that currently exist for the Chargers that we're having a totally different conversation. So I saw people tweeting that like, oh, the Chargers write them off, like go ahead and move on to next year. I just don't think so. If I'm the Chargers and I know I'm going to get Joe Alt back, if that's true, then I actually am buying. I'm looking at a Tony Pollard. I'm looking at a Jerome Ford. I'm trying to make a move for a running back to put somebody back there, knowing that the entire environment's going to get that much better once Alt's back on the field.
I think they're in like a class of teams where it's like, yeah, they could be buyers or sellers, but I don't really know how selling or buying helps them as a franchise at this point. Like the Chargers could go out and get a running back, tough running back depth right now. But like the true question mark of this team is the offensive line, and in particular the interior offensive line. If Joe Alt comes back and is able to be healthy, like that's been what's killed them.
Yeah.
And as a result, they've had to throw a gazillion times. They haven't really been able to run the ball. We did see a good game from Kamani Vidal, but like it's been a struggle when you have an upright quarterback who has little to no offensive line help, and you just can't get that at the trade deadline. So I would lean towards the Chargers doing nothing or just going out and using a late round pick to get a running back. But I just don't see them making any generational moves here.
No, but I also think, I mean, maybe this is a good time to talk about the types of players that are typically moved at the deadline.
Yeah.
Are they generational players? Is that what we're even talking about?
No, typically these guys, I mean, like if you just want to look at wide receivers and edges, because that's kind of what everyone needs right here. Cornerbacks as well is another place where I think everyone needs a cornerback, but I just don't know how many are going to be on the market. If you're trading for a wide receiver, you're probably trading for like a bottom end wide receiver 2. Or a wide receiver 3, like realistically. And so just to put it in terms of fantasy points, because I think that's a really good way to see kind of like the impact that you're really expecting to just throw onto a team. Like the 50th percentile, the median is like a 6 fantasy point guy. So a guy who's on the waiver wire in your fantasy league. And if you want to put that in terms of receiving yards, like a guy who's going to get like 30 or 40 receiving yards a game. And even at the maximum, you really look at the 2 absolute max guys who have been traded who immediately had an excellent impact. And it's Devontae Adams, who was, off the field, didn't want to be there. There's all this other stuff going on. And Amari Cooper, who was very similar. And then it's a big fall off into guys like Deion Branch and Antonio Bryant in 2010 and 2004. And then the most recent after that is Emmanuel Sanders, who went on to average like 10 fantasy points. And so you're just not getting that high level guy who's going to shake up an entire offense or in terms of a defense, who's really just going to like go ahead and just be the number 1 pass rusher in the league. And I think that's why particularly talking about the Bengals, talking about Trey Hendrickson, like it's just, you don't know if that guy is going to get moved. He's just too valuable to the team.
He's such an interesting one, though, because of his contract situation.
Right.
And the fact that so he is on a 1-year deal right now, $29 million, signed that in the offseason. So he will be a free agent next offseason. The fact that he signed a contract, though, last year means that they didn't use the tag on him, which means that they still have a tag available.
Right.
And so, I mean, you could argue that they could maybe get some value, that he's still valuable to them just sticking around.
Right.
Because they know that they can tag him for another year and get him at a relatively inexpensive deal. But because of his contract status and the fact that this season does feel lost for them, he feels like an interesting guy to watch. Do you have a sense of like, that's the name? There was another one, Max Crosby. Trey Wingo reported that the Cowboys have made calls to the Raiders about Max Crosby. So there are two big names actually at the edge position that have come up this year.
Yeah, I think the same discourse we had for months, Lindsay, about like Micah Parsons. Obviously, that was a wildly different situation, especially now that these guys have played games in a Bengals and a Raiders uniform. But like, are you really going to trade a guy, especially mid-season, where you're kind of probably hurrying to get a deal done? Maybe you don't get a chance to like survey the full market. You're basing this off of a evaluation of your team that has come about in the last 2 weeks. Are you really going to trade for a draft asset that you just hope would be Max Crosby for the next 4 years, or hope you would be Trey Hendrickson for the next 2 years? It's just very difficult to make that argument, especially given all the uncertainty in the draft, and particularly these two teams, which one has a very long-term view, and Max Crosby is probably a major part of that, given, his relative youth, given that he just re-signed a contract. And then you look at Trey Hendrickson, and that's a team that wants to compete every single year, given that they just gave huge contracts to their premium wide receivers and their premium quarterback. And it's not really too bad of a deal to just tag a guy, especially given that you've already gotten those deals done. So there's so many weird kind of items here, in particular to the edge rushers. Would I love to see Max Crosby go to the Dallas Cowboys, especially given how that offense is playing right now? Of course, that would be awesome.
I don't want that. Why would you do that to Max? No.
The Cowboys are so fun, and he's from Texas. Homecoming, Jerry world. Jerry's right. He gets to go on First Take and talk. Man, it would be great for the National Football League, like, business, if that happened.
It would be great for the National Football League.
Sundays, but whatever.
Is if either of those two goes to the Lions. After the Packers went out and got Micah Parsons. I said this last year for obvious reasons that I totally understand. This didn't happen. The fact that we're sitting here a year later and the same names are we're talking about them again.
Yeah.
If I'm the Lions, I will send what it takes to go get one of those guys, put him on my line with Aiden Hutchinson and say, F it, this is our year. We're going to go take this, because they're solidly in the mix for, the Super Bowl. And if they go get either of these guys, I will throw a parade on my street celebrating the ultimate roster building coup. Like, someone just needs to go grab it. And I mean, maybe it makes more sense for a team like the Cowboys, who desperately need it, to give up the capital that a team might want. But if I'm the Lions, I just go over the top. Like, you need to go get whatever that piece is that just solidifies you as the top contender.
Yeah. And let me kind of build the pathway for why a deal like this could be done per se.
Do it.
So there was rumors that the Philadelphia Eagles were blowing up the Cowboys' phone about Micah Parsons, and were just like trying to get him, trying to do what it takes. And of course, you're not going to trade him in division, but the thought process was there. And the reason why they could have done something like that is because of their history of extending guys early. And the two teams that extend the guys the absolute earliest They missed out on this with Aiden Hutchinson, but obviously it didn't really benefit Aiden Hutchinson or the team to a certain degree to reach an extension this year because of the massive leg injury. Hutch probably knew that he was in good shape, was going to have a great year this year. There's risk on the backside of that. But the Lions have extended Amon-Ra St. Brown early. They've extended Jared Goff when a lot of people said they didn't want to do it. They extended Penei Sewell early. And so you keep getting these incremental additions where 2-3 years down the line, Amon-Ra St. Brown is like the 10th to 11th most highest paid wide receiver. And then you can add in a guy who has that premium top level contract like Max Crosby. And so if any team were in a position long-term to make a deal like this, it would probably be the Lions. Now, how do you manage the extension of Hutchinson that has to come given his play? I mean, if you watch the Monday Night Football game, he's all over the field the entire game. He had several games with forced fumbles, causing pressures. He was giving Tristan Wirfs major problems. How do you manage that? I don't necessarily know, but if you are managing the cap, you are making those quality moves early. I mean, Lindsay, you don't have to tell me twice to have like Max Crosby on the most fun team in the league when it comes to watching them at Ford Field.
Oh, it'd be so fun. I mean, either of them, to be honest. The fact that we've got two up for grabs that could be massive. I mean, Max Crosby obviously is where I would start of those two from an age standpoint. His contract is done. But the fact that you could pivot to Trey Hendrickson, we do need to talk about whether or not the comp pick, how that comes into play here. Because, I mean, so both of these guys are going to go for a higher draft pick. So this is an unrelated point to these guys. But for a lot of the other guys that we're talking about trading, it's not just so obvious like, oh, just trade them away because we're going to lose them at the end of the year, because sometimes you're going to get a comp pick back, right? If you were to lose them yourself in free agency. So a guy that you would go just pay a small rental fee for is not necessarily, that's not an obvious move for the team that's going to lose that player to make. In these cases, what do you think the price is?
In the case of
in Hendrickson and in Crosby?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Crosby, the market's basically been set. I mean, like there's 3 guys who are looked at as premium rushers, or 4, the 3 that are on like these big level contracts. It's Micah, it's Max, and it's Miles. And so it has to be built off of whatever the structure of that Micah Parsons deal was. And given it's midseason, whoever the Raiders probably have the leverage, they probably want to keep him. It's probably slightly different than the Cowboys and Packers situation where he's already on a deal and you're getting him for multiple years. Like I don't see how that wouldn't be just like immense amounts of capital. It's a little different for Trey Hendrickson because, like you said, ostensibly like it would be a 1-year rental, but I don't know if it really makes sense to trade for Trey Hendrickson if you are an excellent team and not try to keep him for multiple years. And like, moreover, like, I just don't know what the landing spot other than like maybe the Lions would be for Trey Hendrickson, but we've seen them do that before with Zadarius Smith, who wasn't really up to that level. And then go ahead and let him go the next year, which I just don't think it's the same case, but it's very interesting this year because it feels like there's edges that could be had. And there's just like not that many people this year for whatever reason that need great pass rush help that are in that zone. The like Steelers zone. The Falcons have found some success with young pass rushers. The Cowboys obviously would be the team that would be looking the most, but the Vikings and the 49ers have seen success despite injuries on their team as well. But then you flip it to the cornerbacks and it feels like everybody needs cornerbacks and no one has any to trade. So it's like a very interesting push and pull at those 2 very core defense positions.
That's what I would do if I was the Bills. If I was looking to upgrade here at the deadline. I don't, the wide receivers that people are talking about, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Like getting a Jacoby Myers just feels like exactly what you already have on your roster. I don't need that, but I do need some a cornerback upgrade. But to your point, like, where are you going to get that? And that's why the Browns but the Browns Jaguars trade was so interesting
Right.
because you were trading two starters at the exact same position
Right.
that were just, for whatever reason, differently valuable to the two
Mhm.
teams. So those kinds of trades are hard to figure out on the outside, right? Like,
Right.
then you have to
Right.
go, hey, is this guy good in man? But they play zone. And so let's go find a different team. There's a lot more connecting the dots that's necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting just the system that Sean McDermott wants to play, where you're going to have 5 and 6 DBs on the field quite a bit, and I think that's why one of the most recent trades for a cornerback was for Rasul Douglas with the Buffalo Bills back in 2023, and it took like quite a bit of draft capital to go ahead and go get him off of the Packers. And so I just like don't see a guy who's like really available, right? Like you could go look at the Jets and you could say that the Jets are, last in the league. They have the assets to go get draft capital so that they could potentially move up for a quarterback in the next couple of years, blah, 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 blah. But like they just re-signed Sauce Gardner to a big time deal. And it doesn't really make sense for them having just signed that signing bonus and having him on the team, and the defense actually not performing super poorly. They're one of the better teams in defensive success rate, 5th at 39.44%. It just like doesn't make sense to let go of that guy if that's the way that you're kind of performing right now, and that's your cap situation. And I just like can't ID a cornerback that could really help the Bills in excess of the guys who have already been in the system.
Yeah, I'm with you. That one's a tough one. And I'm with you that Sauce makes no sense. If the entire goal, like if you find a quarterback in the draft next year, then you're going to go looking for a cornerback. Like you need a cornerback, you need an edge rusher, you need a wide receiver, you need an offensive tackle. Like you got to hang on to Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner and the two that check those boxes so that you limit the number of high positional value pieces that you're still looking for. I'm interested in the Rams making like a smaller move. Like cornerback again. Like, I mean, we could say this for a lot of different teams. Rams are a team that I think if they could find a cornerback that was just an upgrade over what they have, maybe nothing particularly flashy, but just better, then that's a move that I think I could see them making or would like them to make. I would also love maybe a linebacker for the Rams because they also feel like a team that has the pieces to really go make a run. I think it's interesting what you said, that a lot of the teams that are making these moves historically are the teams that are a little bit more like 500 and they just need to get a little bit better. I'm looking to put pieces on, and maybe this is the fan in me, the teams that feel the closest to being real good. Like,
yeah.
But that also strategically makes sense to me. If I'm a general manager and I'm like, oh my God, it's so close, I can taste it. Let's just go get that thing right now. This is the time we make a move.
Yeah, I think there's like really 4-ish teams that are really interesting there. We already mentioned the Lions, who just like got KO'd over the last 2 weeks again somehow in the defensive backfield. I mean, they had guys who were making really, really good plays and high levels of coaching, but at some point when your fourth nickel gets hurt, like what are you going to do?
Isn't that another reason to give up anything you need to go get an edge rusher? Because if you can't find the cornerback help, let's just make it so that you don't have time to throw.
Exactly. That's why I like highlight them as just having like an absolute glaring need. And then I think you look at the Bills, I had them as having a glaring need. You look at the Broncos, perhaps the wide receiver position, pass catching positions, skill positions. They could probably use some help, but typically they've managed to stay pat other than the trade of Vele at the beginning of the season. And then the other one I really highlighted was the Eagles. I think the Eagles probably do need some edge rushing help. We've seen them kind of be able to maintain churn at the edge position, but I'm really worried about their cornerbacks as well. But I mean, like, as we stated, like I don't, you mentioned the Rams cornerbacks. That's a team that plays basically 4 safeties throughout the game. You mentioned some of these other teams that badly need cornerbacks. The Vikings are another team who have needed secondary help for basically 2 years. And I just like don't see the pathway to really acquiring it unless you pull off some really creative deal and have some strange valuation as the Browns did.
Gauntlet laid down. Les Snead can get creative. He's proven that in the past. The Raiders we've talked about. Jacoby Myers, where's a team for him? Because it feels likely. He probably feels like the most likely guy to get traded in the next few weeks to me.
Yeah, I think that you have to look at a team that is trying to solve the second or third wide receiver problem. Like, I just don't think a team is going to make a move for him to be the top flight wide receiver. We mentioned that with the Bills. The team that I've highlighted is the San Francisco 49ers. If Pearsall is able to come back and you kind of have this mix of guys where Pearsall would be the one, I guess you could say Kittle or McCaffrey or some combination of those two would be your second option. And you got to bank against any of these guys getting hurt, given in the last 2 years, you've had Jawan Jennings hurt. Ayuk could come back from a devastating leg injury. Pearsall's been out. McCaffrey's been out. Kittle's been out. I think it just makes sense to kind of like slot another guy into that team long term, especially given like we've seen up and down play from Kendrick Bourne. We've seen really good play. We've seen not so good play. And so I think that's a team that I have highlighted of like a team that could probably be a buyer on the offensive side of the ball, just to continue adding to the deck, especially given that they've probably overachieved as compared to their injury situation right now.
Not even probably, 100%. I can't believe that they've had the success that they've had. Give
Right.
Kyle Shanahan the Coach of the Year award right now. What about the Steelers?
The Steelers are really interesting because, Lindsay, we kind of dunked on DK Metcalf during the summer, and he's really shown that he's playing pretty well. The question becomes is like, Calvin Austin is supposed to be coming back. Is that really a great option? The unique style that Arthur Smith likes to play is why I just don't know if this is a landing spot for a wide receiver, because they have found quite a bit of success playing with like 2 and 3 tight ends throughout the games. We've seen Darnell Washington have touchdown catches. We've seen big games from Freiermuth. We've seen the involvement of Jonnu Smith. And so I just wonder if that's the pathway that they really want to go right now. And in particular, given they have, an older quarterback, if it's worth the draft capital to do that, especially given an older secondary as well. You think of Darius Slay, you think of Jalen Ramsey, some of these other guys, they're an aging team. I just don't know if it makes sense for them to make a move. I think, you
Even
look
if
at,
he's not, but even if, so Aaron, let's say Aaron's
yeah.
done after this year and you're plugging in a new quarterback, you're still going to need wide receivers there. Like the wide receiver room just doesn't have any depth. And so even
Yeah.
if you want to go roll out, 3 tight ends on the reg, which I don't know if that's what you want to do as your base offense,
Right.
but even if it is, you still need more wide receivers than DK. And I also think that Aaron is at such an age where he might need specific wide receivers,
Yeah.
I don't like just people who check different boxes at different
Mhm.
levels of the field for him, that are professional wide receivers, not young, not developing, don't want that. That's not a good fit for him. What about like Rashid Shaheed?
I think if there was a play to be had, Rashid Shaheed is probably like Calvin Austin, but has proven himself at this point, like a better version of Calvin Austin. Absolute speeds for deep guy, and that's the kind of ball they want to play. I could see them making a move. I just wonder, to the same concept as we talked about Cam Ward, like you have a second round pick in Tyler Shuck, you have Spencer Rattler, who has played, he's played at an average or above average clip right now. You're trying to develop these guys, or you're probably trying to go get someone down the line. It just depends on what that contract situation is for Shaheed. I wonder if they're going to move off Olave or Shaheed, even though there's a lot of heat around those guys, especially given that last year, when those guys went down, they just had nothing on the offensive side of the ball. I think they
You
want to
can move off of
maintain.
Olave. I don't
You
think you
do.
can, for the
You don't.
same reason that
Yeah.
we're talking about not moving off of Sauce. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
I'm overestimating the talent level of Olave, but I don't think I am. I think he's a very good wide receiver that just hasn't really been on our radar in that way. A, because of the injuries, but also because B, he's been in this like purgatory situation of an offense for the
Right.
last few years. I think if you did plug in quarterback play that was excellent and an environment and a team that was winning, I think that Chris Olave would be in a totally different tier of wide receiver. I just don't think you trade that away. You're going to need someone for these guys that you're developing to throw to. I would pick him to keep, and I would send Rashid Shaheed for picks.
Yeah, it's a fair point, but you really look at kind of their team and the places where you would invest those picks in, and they have a pretty young offensive line that's progressing well. Fuaga and Banks have played, not fantastic, but they're playing well. And so it's a very interestingly built team. I almost wonder if like the veteran players wouldn't be the ones to be moved, but like, look, Lindsay, I'm a
On
Saints
the
fan.
defensive side of the ball now, or are you
Yeah,
talking like
I'm talking
who?
on the defensive side of the ball.
So Cam
And
Jordan, Demario Davis. You're sad. You're
would
sad.
I
I can see the New Orleans resident in you
look?
looking sad now.
Analyst Sam is going to have to take a back seat right here because I've watched, almost 20 years of Cam Jordan. It feels like at this point, and man, it's just sad. It's just sad to see those two guys go. But Demario Davis, for example, is playing extremely well, particularly in coverage as a linebacker. He's still one of the better linebackers in the league, and Cam Jordan can probably help stifle up a run defense that needs some help. I'd be really interested, particularly if the right situation arises, if they don't have like one last hoorah before doing their last signing with the Saints and retiring or something like that. It's interesting, but like, of the four guys on the Saints, for wildly different reasons, I just don't necessarily see them moving any of those four personally. That being said, I didn't necessarily.
Who do they move? They got to move someone.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, yeah, but like, I don't know. I mean, like, I last year it was clear that that they were going to move Marshawn. He had a hamstring injury. He was not helping the team at the time. He was valuable to other people. There were multiple buyers, and they got a very, very good deal given what we've seen from Marshawn Lattimore. But like, if there's a guy that would be moved, I'd probably rank Shaheed the first in like probability to be moved. I think the most valuable asset that they have is probably Demario Davis. And that's assuming
Where
that they
can we
want to
put
keep
him?
Olave. Oh man,
I'm going to just steamroll right past the part where you said he's going to stay. I'm going to put him on a different team.
Yeah, I mean, like,
I said I wanted a linebacker for the Rams. Does that fit or no?
I think they're probably fine trotting out Nate Landman. Like, I think he's played
pretty well. They're very fine with Landman.
Yeah. He's pretty.
In addition to,
he's played pretty well. I wonder if they want to move away from their kind of dime, big nickel style of play. You look at teams like
because they don't have another linebacker.
It's an excellent question. I mean, we've seen them try Omar Spates out, who is just, in terms of Sumer scoring, in terms of some of these other metrics, has just not been very good. I think you put both of those guys on defense, and they made an investment in Bobby Wagner several years ago as well. Like, that could make sense. I think of a team like the Bears reuniting with Dennis Allen. They've had injuries at the linebacker position. They've had injuries all over the defensive position. I think that would be an interesting move. There's a lot of teams, and the linebacker position is one where you add an older player, you add an experienced player, and it's just an automatic add to your defense. But I do like, the Bears as probably one who could be interested in someone like Demario Davis or a similar player.
Does that? I don't know. The Bears feel like they're not. The Bears feel like, how do I say this? The Bears feel like if they're going to add a piece right now, it would be for roster building for future, not for now. And in that way, I don't know that. I mean, maybe you think he's going to play for a long time. Still, he's what, 36?
I mean, I think you think about maximizing the contract of Caleb Williams, and you put a 2-year horizon on that. I mean, Demario Davis is a pretty good piece if you want to maintain a quality defense for a 2.5-year horizon, I think. And obviously maybe that last year kind of goes by the wayside, but even so, you challenge in the NFC North right now. I think they're feeling more and more confident with each week.
Do you think they could?
Do I think they could win the NFC North this year?
I mean, you said challenge in the NFC North. I don't see that.
No, I don't know if they could like really make it to the top. Now, can they try to squeak out 10 games and sneak into the playoffs over, the Vikings, who we've seen struggle a little bit? Potentially. Like, the biggest outtake that I've had of the Bears is that the receivers are open. Like, the receivers are open and there to be hit. And so if the defense can maintain a level of standard that is good and has allowed them to win some of these games, and when Caleb doesn't necessarily hit the wide receivers, I think, this team can potentially win 10 games, which, I was very big on the beginning of the season that this team's roster wasn't necessarily good. But when the receivers are open, you just got to hit them, Lindsay. You just got to hit them.
I found an offensive lineman.
Who?
that maybe is not gonna,
This would be
like
interesting.
blow anyone's skirt up or anything like that, but worth a call and is somewhat intriguing. And that's Brandon Coleman in Washington, who has been inactive for several weeks now.
Yeah.
Was a liability in pass pro when he did play earlier this season, but he was
Yeah.
good last year. So that might be a guy who teams, especially since one of the things that we know about general managers and NFL teams is that they are married to their draft priors.
Right.
So if there is someone who liked him in the draft and, went a different direction, then they kind of feel like I can fix you. Like that feels like an interesting guy to at least call about.
Yeah.
Take a shot.
And I mean, this team has been active. This team got smashed
God,
by the
wow,
Seahawks
what is happening?
with four turnovers. The Texans would be the one. Like, I mean, they're like I have a subsection of teams that I'm just like, I don't know if they can be helped. And I think that's the Texans. Like, their defense is incredible. You very, 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 very rarely lose a game when you have four turnovers. Their defense is performing extremely well. You look at their EPA differential in particular, because that puts some of the defensive stats a little bit more in relief, particularly as it pertains to turnovers. That game, they kind of got blown out. They were kind of there, but after a while, like, the game was out of hand by the 6-minute mark. But you really look at EPA and what EPA says should have happened, and man, like, they're like 8th or 7th in EPA differential because of those turnovers, because of the quality of the defense, and they just need like anybody on the offensive line.
That's a really interesting team that I wouldn't have thought about to talk about, but absolutely check the boxes.
2-5, right? 2-5.
Yeah, I mean, and so you would think like seller, if anything, except you have to put pieces around this young quarterback.
Yeah.
You have to develop him. Like, you cannot let him be somebody's next Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones.
Right.
Like, we can't do that with CJ Stroud. They got to figure it out.
And they have 3 young wide receivers. Like, I mean, you have Hutchinson, you have...
It's a line issue. It is a line issue.
There's literally like not that much else that they can do. Hence why I'm like, I just don't know if you can be helped right now. It's impossible to get offensive linemen, and you like need offensive linemen. You let Laramie Tunsil go out the door. Laramie Tunsil's been a beast all year. Just like lots of question marks.
As of right now, the Houston Texans have the 10th pick in the draft and the 4th most draft capital. You think we can just go ahead and pencil in a tackle there? Wherever they end up picking in the first round, like guaranteed lock, that's going to be an offensive tackle?
Yeah, I mean, they picked Ariante Ursary this year. I feel like you got to do basically what the Saints did when they started losing tackle depth and had to play multiple people, and then all of a sudden you're in a spot that you like. Like, I think the Saints are fine with Fuaga and Banks right now, and I think, Ursary develops a little bit over the year. You take another tackle, and maybe you feel good about that, and you're not having to send chips literally every single play against the Seahawks defense, which is quite good. Probably one of the better ones in the league.
Yeah.
And it's extremely good from a scheme perspective. But man, you got to help him out a little bit. Interesting stat I noticed today. Number 1 in total rushing EPA is CJ Stroud. That is not a place you want CJ Stroud to be. Like, under any circumstances, because that means he's running for his life and just like trying to scrap out anything he got.
At least he's running well.
He is doing things.
That is not what I would have thought.
No.
One last bit of information to pass along here that I think is an interesting way, some numbers to keep in mind with regards to who might make moves. These are the 10 teams who have the most draft capital going into next year. So they've got a lot of picks, or they've got a lot of value picks. So they might have some extra pieces sitting around if they wanted to make a move. The Browns have the most. The Dolphins have the second most. Thank God, need so many things. The Ravens have the 3rd most. The Texans have the 4th most. Then you've got the Steelers. Then you've got the Jets. Then you've got the Eagles. Then you've got the Rams, the Raiders, and Cowboys. So in terms of teams that might be buyers, then you've got the Rams up there with some capital that they can maybe afford to spend. The Eagles also. The Steelers. Although I don't know that the Steelers can afford it, because they're going to need to go get a quarterback in the offseason.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but they're in a weird spot because, like I said, with the other 3 teams in the AFC North have been terrible.
Right.
So if there's one year that after the last few years, everybody just criticizing Tomlin being at 500 or just above 500, making the playoffs and then one and done, and wanting more than that. This is the year to go.
Yeah.
Like, let's at least put that narrative to bed for a hot minute and take
Yeah.
everyone off the hot seat.
And not for nothing, Lindsay, this defense is 25th in EPA per play right now. And like the secondary issues that were addressed by Jalen Ramsey and all these other guys last year, like they let some of the young guys go, have still a major problem. Put in stark relief last Thursday by, Jamar Chase, 23 targets, 17 catches, 170 whatever yards. Like, I've got some of those numbers wrong, but it could have been infinity yards, and I would have believed it watching that game.
So interesting. All right. Well, we'll see if we're right about any of this stuff in a couple of weeks. The trade deadline is on November 4th at 4 p.m. Eastern. We will be live here on the SumerSports show to walk you through all of the moves that were made. Thank you for being with us here today. For Sam Bruchhaus, I'm Lindsay Rhodes. We'll see you again next week.